Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. With the Armageddon box now out and the Blood Angels getting some time in the spotlight, I thought it would be a good chance to look back at the last time the Sons of Sanguinius were the cover art of 40k, the second edition box from 1993. A much brighter and more relaxed time. So today I'm going to paint a modern Space Marine in the 90s Blood Angels colour scheme and see if I can bring some colour back to 40k. The first thing I've done is prime the model white. The brighter undercoat will make all of the colours I paint on top appear brighter and really help give this model that second edition look. First, with Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to apply this all over the model. This paint is a lot brighter than the Mephiston Red that is used as the base for Blood Angels power armour now, and much closer in colour to the original Blood Red paint that was used to paint them in the 90s. I'm going to make sure I paint all of the model red at this stage because I don't want any white to show through later. The problem with white undercoats is that any missed areas will be really obvious on the finished model, which is why I often prime in black as it's much more forgiving. But by getting a solid coat of red all over the model, I won't have to worry about any white spots showing later, and I can still get the brighter effect of the white primer. I'm working in several thin layers for this base coat. It will take about 3 layers to build up to solid coverage, but by keeping the paint nice and thin, I won't clog up any detail and I will get a nice smooth finish at the end. I'm painting over the weapon here as well, although I will be painting this again later. By covering the weapon with red as well as the rest of the model, will make sure that I don't actually end up with any of those white spots showing through later on. It is worth taking the time on this base coat to get full coverage, as so much of the model is the red power armour. Spending a few more minutes here will save a load of time in touch-ups later on and give a great looking mini at the end. And after a few layers of Evil Sun Scarlet, you can see I've got a nice smooth base coat on the armour. Now with Corvus Black, I'm going to paint a lot of the details. First, I'm catching all of the ribbed areas where you can see the undersuit between the gaps in the power armour. I'm being very careful to avoid painting any of the power armour, as black will be very difficult to tidy up over, but I'm making sure I catch all of the exposed areas of the undersuit with Corvus Black. It may take a couple of layers to get solid cover, but these black details will break up the red a bit and add some interest to the mini. I'm also catching any straps or cables on the mini as well with some black, like these ones on his back, and I'm carefully painting the rims of the shoulder pads with black as well. The shoulder pad trim is no longer painted black, but if you look at artwork and minis from second edition, you'll see that a lot of the Blood Angels had black trim to their shoulders. I'm also catching the belt with black as well. This will add a dark line around the middle of the Space Marine and break up the red even more. And finally, I'm painting all of the weapon as well. The casing will stay black, but I'm also painting details that will be silver later on, because I find metallic paints often work best from a black layer rather than a bright colour. With the black applied, you can see the Blood Angels look is already starting to come out. Now with Avalan Sunset, I'm going to paint some gold. I'm starting by painting the Aquila on his chest, as these used to be painted yellow. The use of yellow is what will really give this retro look to this model, as red and yellow were so iconic to that era. With the Aquila, I'm being careful to not paint the armour, but any mistakes can be tidied up later on. And I'm painting the Aquila on his weapon as well. Today this would be gold, but in the 90s, yellow was often used instead of gold. Just think of that yellow trim on second edition Ultramarines. And with the yellow applied, there is just one more base coat to add, and that's some lead belcher to paint all the metallic details. With this, I'm painting all the metal areas on the gun, like the muzzle, magazine, stock, and parts of the scope, and anything that I don't want to be black, I'm painting with lead belcher. Some of the details are quite small, so be careful to not paint over the black casing, but if you do make any mistakes, they're easy to fix by painting over with black again. I'm also catching all of the vents on the backpack, being careful around the red I've already painted, but catching these vents at the bottom and the ones at the top with some lead belcher. With the metallics painted, that is all of the base coats applied, so now it's time to add some shades. With Agrax Earthshade first, I'm applying a pin shade into all of the recesses of the power armour. I'm not applying this as an all-over shade because I don't want to darken down the armour at all, but I do want to add some definition and bring out all of the joints and details to the armour. I'm keeping a good point to my brush and making sure I don't overload the brush, and I'm sinking some Agrax Earthshade into all of the recesses, joints in the armour and around the edges of any detail to the armour with this pin shade. I'm making sure I keep the shade under control at all times so it won't spill out and go into places I don't want it to be. This step may take a while, but it will really add definition to the model and make the power armour stand out. There are a lot of recesses and edges of details on the power armour to catch, but by taking your time, this step will really add some detail and make your minis look great, even from a distance. Now with known oil, I'm going to apply a shade to the black and metallic areas. I'm applying this shade as an all-over shade to the undersuit areas, as well as the straps, making sure there isn't any overspill onto the armour. I'm also catching the belt and applying this all over the casing to the gun, as well as the metal areas, catching these with a shade of known oil. And finally, I'm catching all of the vents on the backpack with a shade of known oil as well. Finally, with Reikland Flesh Shade, I'm shading the yellow details. This will add a nice richness to the yellow and make it read as a really deep, rich colour. So I'm catching the Aquila on his chest, as well as the one on his weapon, with a shade of Reikland Flesh Shade. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. With the shade paints dried, you can see how they've really brought out the definition, especially on the armour. Now it's time to apply some highlights. Starting with Wild Rider Red, I'm going to apply an edge highlight to all of the power armour. Much like applying the shade, this step takes a bit of time, but it really will make that power armour pop and bring out all of the details on the model. I'm catching the very edge of every panel and every line in the power armour with a thin highlight of Wild Rider Red. I want to keep these lines thin so they don't change the colour of the power armour, but will give the impression of light catching the edges of every panel. If at any point you come in a bit too thick with a highlight, you can tidy back up with some Evil Sun Scarlet, but by just using the tip of your brush and keeping an even pressure as you paint each line, you should end up with nice even lines on all of the details. The Wild Rider Red is only a bit lighter than the base coat, so these lines won't be too bright, but it will give a nice subtle effect to the miniature and really help bring out all of the details of the power armour. Take extra care on places like the helmet, as these will be a focal point to the mini, so keeping the lines nice and even will really bring out the features to the helmet and give you a great looking Space Marine. With that edge of highlight applied, you can see how it's brought out all the details to the power armour. Now with Fire Dragon Bright, I'm applying some spot highlights to the sharpest points of the armour. I don't want to apply this as another edge highlight all over the model, so I'm just picking some of the sharpest corners or details and applying a small spot of this paint. This will look like light is catching on these sharp points and will add a great finishing touch to the power armour and brighten it up just a little bit more. You don't have to catch every single corner with this highlight, just apply it to a few select places, as many as you want. For some of the larger corners, I'm stretching the highlights slightly up both sides of the corner, making sure that some of the previous highlights still visible. This will just help sell the effect of light catching and really show off the details on the mini. With the spot highlight applied, that is the armour highlighted. Now with Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm going to highlight all of the black details. For the undersuit, I'm carefully catching the tops of all the ridges with a small highlight of grey. I'm being careful not to apply too much pressure to my brush so I don't paint into the grooves, and I'm just catching the very tops with a highlight. I'm keeping the lines nice and even and working around the model, picking out all the ridges on the undersuit with a thin highlight. On the straps, I'm catching any raised details with a small highlight of grey as well. And on the belt, I'm applying a thin edge highlight to the top and bottom of the belt, making sure I keep control of my brush so the lines aren't too thick. And on the casing to the weapon, I'm carefully picking out the edges of all the panels with a thin highlight as well. Some of these details are pretty small, so I'm using the tip of my brush to keep them as small as possible. For the larger, flatter areas, I'm using the side of my brush, as this is a great way to get an even highlight really quickly, as long as the area is flat enough to run the brush along. But for the rest, I'm just carefully applying an edge highlight to all the parts of the casing of the gun. With the black highlighted, this is really looking like a Blood Angel now. So next, with Uriel Yellow, I'm highlighting the Aquillas. I'm being really careful with the chest Aquila as I reach in and catch the very tops of all of the raised details. This will brighten them up just a bit, leaving the shade in the recesses and some of the base coat showing as well. I'm doing the same with the Aquila on his gun as well, catching all of the raised details with a highlight. This bright yellow and the bright armour are what really give this model that second edition look. And with the yellow highlighted, there is just one more highlight left. And that's with Stormhost Silver. I'm going to highlight all of the metal details. I'm catching areas like the muzzle to his weapon, as well as the edges of the magazine and any other metal details with a thin edge highlight. This highlight will give the impression of light catching on the edges of the metal and help finish off the model. As well as the weapon, I'm also catching the edges of the vents on the backpack as well, giving these a small, thin highlight of Stormhost Silver. And with the metal highlighted, the only thing left is to give this Blood Angel his glowing green eyes. Starting with Caliban Green, I'm carefully painting this into the recesses of the eye lenses. I'm making sure I don't overspill and paint anything else, so I'm just carefully making sure I keep the paint under control as I paint the eyes. You may have to move the model around to make sure that you're painting from a comfortable angle. As these are small details, it's always best to make sure that you have full control of both the mini and the brush. Next, with Warpstone Glow, I'm painting a thin line at the bottom of the eye lenses. I'm making sure I leave some of the Caliban Green showing, and this line is nice and fine at the very bottom of each eye lens. Keeping a good grip of the mini is key here, as any slips can end up in painting all of the eye, and it will need the Caliban Green painting in there again. Now with Moot Green, I'm applying a small spot at the front of each eye lens. This small spot will really brighten up the eye and make it look like it's glowing and really give some character to the model. Just make sure these spots are nice and small so some of the Warpstone Glow and Caliban Green are still showing in the eyes. Finally, with some White Scar, I'm painting a small spot in the very back of each eye. You want this spot to be nice and small, just in the back corner. The white will look like light reflecting at that point and really sell the impression of glowing green eye lenses. With the eyes painted, that is how to paint a modern Space Marine in the classic 2nd edition 40k Blood Angels colours. But what do you think about this retro glow up to the modern range? To compare this model against a Blood Angel painted as they are now, you can see just how much darker the current colour scheme is. The retro look is a lot more vibrant and really does stand out. This would look great on a table up against an army painted in the more modern muted colours. So do you prefer the brighter 2nd edition style of painting Space Marines, or the darker, more gritty paint schemes of today? I really like this retro look, and I think I'm going to paint my Armageddon box in this style. And I'll even paint the orcs in a bright retro style as well. If you would like to see me painting the box and the orcs in retro colours, please let me know in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!